since Syracuse is having a quarterback competition, they are doing the exact right thing by not tipping their hand. Unless it's a captain obvious starter. Like, go back to last season, Kyle McCord. We knew he was going to be the starting quarterback. We knew there was no quarterback competition. We knew in 2023 that it was going to be Garrett Schrader. And in 2022, we knew that it was going to be Garrett Schrader. There was no reason to publicly portray out there, oh, we're having a quarterback battle for our starting quarterback. We don't want to let the other opponent know. No. When it's tapped and obvious, there's no reason to do that. You just anoint your starter. It's obvious, right? But in this case, why let Tennessee know what you're thinking as far as quarterback when we're still about 3 weeks out? You want to give Tennessee about 3 weeks to prepare for only one of Steve Angeli or Rickie Collins? I don't think so. Even if Tennessee wasn't a 14.5-point favorite, even if instead of Tennessee, week 1 was Colgate, you still probably don't want to tip your hand as far as who you think the quarterback is going to be in week 1. And by the way, Tennessee is doing the same thing. Like, we'll discuss later in the week Tennessee battles at certain positions and things that we need to monitor as Syracuse fans, one of which is quarterback. They are not tipping their hand. They got this transfer from Appalachian State in Joey Aguilar. We think he's going to be the starting quarterback, but you wouldn't necessarily know that from what Tennessee is saying. So both Tennessee and Syracuse are not tipping their hand publicly as far as who the quarterback is going to be in week 1. Now, there's been a concern that has been brought to my attention as far as the Syracuse quarterback battle, and I feel this is the perfect podcast to address it because I can give you my honest opinion on this. There is an old football saying, and this is the concern for Syracuse, right? If you have 2 quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. It essentially means that if there is a battle for who the top guy is on a team, then your team simply doesn't have a top guy. But I got to be honest with you, I believe a lot more in this saying when it comes to the NFL rather than it does in college. And the reasoning is because in college, you have the transfer portal and you have high school recruiting. You can have multiple really good quarterbacks on your team in college versus in the NFL, that does not happen quite as often, right? In the NFL, when there is a quarterback competition that's out there, you're not seeing it between Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow. It's usually something like Joe Flacco versus Gardner Minshew. That's an example of if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none. Or sometimes there's the rookie quarterback versus the journeyman veteran competing for the starting job. And it's unfair to call a rookie not a starting quarterback. But the point being is that the statement, if you have 2 quarterbacks, you have none, applies more to the NFL than it does in college. In fact, you can go look at Syracuse, a recent example of a quarterback competition to prove this. Now, I'm not exactly going to sit here and say that these 2 quarterbacks we're about to talk about are, I guess you can keep saying Patrick Mahomes and Joe Burrow, but they're pretty good. They were pretty decent. In 2021, Syracuse had Garrett Schrader, and they also had Tommy DeVito. Now, DeVito was coming off a knee injury, I believe, and Garrett Schrader was a converted wide receiver from Mississippi State. But hey, they had those 2 quarterbacks on the roster, and they were duking it out in the preseason, or I guess in fall camp. There is no preseason in college football. Now I got the NFL all mixed into my head. I'm sorry. I apologize about that. But the point being is that even at Syracuse in 2021, they had 2 pretty decent quarterbacks. Garrett Schrader, he was pretty good for Syracuse. 2021, I think, was his best statistical season, at least rushing-wise. 2022, he led Syracuse to a bowl. 2023, he led Syracuse to a bowl despite being injured for about half that season. So 2 bowls in 3 years for Garrett Schrader. And Tommy DeVito, while he did not work out for Syracuse, he did go to Illinois in 2022, had a pretty good year there, and parlayed that into an NFL career. So, yeah, Syracuse is having a quarterback competition, and they're not going to publicly say who is favored. But I believe it's more so of they don't want to tip their hand towards Tennessee, which is the exact same thing that Tennessee is doing instead of the age old, if you have two quarterbacks, you have no quarterbacks. Because in college, there's much more of a track record of teams having multiple good quarterbacks versus the NFL, where that saying is mostly true. It's very difficult for an NFL team to have two starting quarterbacks on the roster, mainly because there are not 32 starting quarterbacks in the NFL. I know technically by the numbers, they say they have to be 32 starting quarterbacks, but only about 20 to 25 are actually starting caliber. The rest just rotate year in and year out. So I'm not necessarily worried about Syracuse as far as they might not have any good quarterbacks. I can't prove it. We won't find out until the actual season starts, but I am confident that Syracuse will get solid quarterback play in 2025.